Yeah, hello. Thank you so much, Mario. Thank you for the lovely introduction and for preparing this webinar with the Moho team and everything. It's super exciting to be working with the team. I've been using Moho for quite a few years now. It's one of my favorite pieces of software. So yeah, I'm just really excited to be here. This is also my first time doing sort of a webinar like this, so I do apologize if I'm a bit all over the place or fumbling. It's just, yeah, I work in cartoons. I'm a bit of a mess. But yeah, I'm very excited to be here, and thank you everyone for coming as well, for joining over the time. But yeah, just to keep the introduction stuff brief, I guess. So yeah, my name is Kim. I've just been in the industry about 8 years, and nearly 7.5 of those years I've been at Cartoon Saloon. So I've been super fortunate to just work with like so many teams of incredible artists across so many different productions, TV productions, feature films. I think my first project was actually season 2 of Puffin Rock, and that was actually my first time working with the Moho software, getting to just see all the characters and rigs and put it all together in compositing, and then just work my way up through different productions like Breadwinner, Late Afternoon Wolfwalkers, assisting Victor Paredes as well, Moho's own fabulous software developer, and he's a fabulous supervisor as well at Cartoon Saloon. So I've just been working with him to help build so many things from different crowds and characters and background elements and assets that we've just been animating with the Moho software. So yeah, it's just been super great experience overall, and I really love the software and the experience. Our most recent production as well was also My Father's Dragon, just with Netflix. That's just wrapped, so it'll hopefully be released later this year, and we got to work with a fabulous freelance Moho team, just fabulous artists all around. So yeah, it was just super great experience. I just loved using the software. But yeah, I guess that's kind of everything just for introduction stuff. So I guess just to cover the webinar. So obviously, just for NDA purposes, I won't be discussing any of the actual Cartoon Saloon productions or showing any work from them, obviously. But yeah, it'll really just be work that I've shared previously in the past. So on social media, just talking through some of these different files and scenes. And hopefully there's a bit in there for everyone. So from rigging to animation and effects, sort of useful techniques or elements, I guess, for different pipelines, whether you're in a massive production or just a small indie project, and also just bits and pieces about compositing, more sort of on the technical side, I guess, for compositing. I don't want to get too sort of in the weeds, but it's just some useful features really in the software that I've learned throughout productions and working with Victor, especially as well. He's just a wizard and just knows so many amazing bits and pieces. But yeah, I guess that's kind of everything really just for the introduction. So I guess I'll just start on rigging, I guess. So yeah, I guess for these topics in general, I don't really want to get too technical or sort of bogged down. Like I will talk through some of these rigs and some of these files and things, but I guess just to explain the concept, I guess. So in terms of like exploration by recreation, this is kind of just something that I really just explore in my work sort of outside of studio work. So I've always just been, I guess, sort of curious whenever I've seen some like fabulous 2D like animated piece, so say like the Bone Hydra from the Hades video game by Supergiant Games, and Studio Grackle, the production as well. They did this fabulous animated trailer for the game. So I've always just wondered like, how would I really approach rigging something like that? Like if that was to be a rigged character, how could I build something like that efficiently? How could I build it to help assist the team and the production, really just to help speed up the artists, and just also just like a really interesting concept of just for honing your skills, just exploring different ways to use the software and just yeah, learn so many different techniques and things. But yeah, I think like just in general, like I've had people ask before, like, oh, like why would you recreate something that's already like an existing character or property if it's already done? But like again, it's just like it's a super just interesting way to hone your skills and just learn different techniques and things. Like it's something where like whenever I've been working on massive TV productions, especially, they're usually very complex character rigs. So like say 360 character rigs, characters with different expressions and clothing and just facial features and hands and so many like so heavy detailed rigs, but just being able to explore so many different options, whether it's a mechanical character or something more organic or multiple different elements. It's a great way to just experience new techniques and things. And especially for show reels and demo reels, I really find it's so great to have such a huge variety of different types of rigs and types of characters on your show reel. So it's especially useful for so many riggers applying to different productions and things. But yeah, so I'll just jump into these guys, I guess. So hopefully you can see that on the screen. I'll just play this through. So yes, this was the Hades, the Bone Hydra. It's just a boss in the video game, basically. So hopefully that's playing okay. It's not too delayed. But yeah, so I think if I just show you some of the reference stuff, just where I started. So basically, this was just a screenshot from the actual trailer by Studio Grackle. So Spencer Wan and his fabulous like 2D animator like team, just this fabulous, very small team, but they like just created all these characters and all these animations from Supergiant games, their references. Yeah, so really like I was just stunned by the trailer. I was like, these guys are so super cool. Like, how long did it take them to animate and design and like just like create these characters? Like, would there be any way to improve that through rigs or just like speed up the team? And the guys were actually super great on their website. They actually have like model sheets and different references for the character. So I was thinking at the time, like, this guy is like, they're quite sort of deceptively complex in a way. Like, he's actually the Hades Bone Hydra, like his design is just so like sort of perfect as well for that vector style of Moho, having a sort of just like really a head rig that can just turn and do different elements and things really. So yeah, so he's actually, if I just play that through again for you, so he's actually, the rig itself is actually quite light, so there really aren't any complex textures or any sort of complex masking. He's really just simple vectors and shapes. So there's fairly simple enough techniques that he's built with. So he really just has this simple sort of head turn. He's actually quite limited, just vertical. I just kept it quite simple, just different turns really. But it's basically just a pin bone, really common technique. I think it's used across different software as well, like Harmony and such, but it just creates this sort of head turn that I just built with smart actions. And the jaw just has these simple sort of open and close shapes. So it's sort of just sort of simple really was the idea. I never wanted to like spend too long on these guys. They're just sort of quick tests. But you can see as well that if I just try posing him with this path and just undoing, so it's really fast to work with, which is kind of the goal at the end of the day, just to make these fast, efficient rigs that anyone on the team could easily use, or to just speed up and assist production really. But yeah, that was him. He's really not too complex. The actual spine, I guess, the spikes on the body really, again, are just simple vector shapes. So they're just sort of in a folder. So they were actually animated on 3s and 5s. I think I was just exploring just slower animation options. You can just see it on different keys, but yeah, we just sort of stuck with 3s. But again, it was to just try and sort of achieve that sort of hand-drawn feel in a sense, just with different frame rates really. But yeah, he really wasn't too overly complex, and the idea is that he would be something like just as a simple background character in the background. He would be able to assist the production, so the artist could spend more time on their own, their hand-drawn work, and he would still just be a useful element in the background. And the speed lines, just really simple, just vector shapes that just appear on top as he just whizzes out of the screen. Yep. So yeah, that was the Bone Hydra, like really not too complex, just something just to really just play around with and have fun with really. So I guess then for other designs, so we would have, so obviously you guys can probably tell I'm a big Nintendo nerd. I love the, yeah, so Breath of the Wild is one video game as well. Super love the Guardian rigs and obviously the R-Wings, this is from Star Fox. So I'll just play that through. So yeah, this again was just another really fun experiment in that it's just entirely 2D, it's just entirely vectors, and I was just kind of exploring like how, I think it's like a railroad shooter type of game is like sort of the concept, sort of a fixed camera as you rotate and move the R-Wing ship. So it was just really exploring like how would you build something like that in Moho, because it's so graphic and simple in its design, and it's such like it's vectors, it's so sort of Moho friendly, it works perfectly well for the kind of software. So yeah, I was just really experimenting with that. And I think I've joked before in the past that like, oh, sometimes you could just build like a 3D rig for this, but again, it's so quick and fast in Moho just to use vectors. Like this took maybe 10 or 20 minutes just to build, and it was really just getting the smart actions to work for different angles again. So really, it's quite a similar concept to the Hydra. So again, I'll just turn on my labels. Labels, yep. So again, it was just a pin bone, just really with these different turns and up and down, just really different vectors. So the idea is that you can just very easily just have this sort of on the spot with a fixed camera and just like very easily just turn and animate it really similar with the smart bone control as well, similar sort of effect. So you could use different bones in conjunction with the point bone, yeah, depending on your situation. So it just has some simple sort of stock animation effects like the thrusters, the pew pew attacks, just really simple little things, and a barrel, of course. One thing that the rigs are really known for, the design. But yeah, this, again, it was just really just exploring just like simpler options, just experimenting and playing around in my spare time really, which is fun to do, just testing around with those. So yeah, that was the R-Wing. I guess a little more involved was the Guardian rig. So this is just sort of the raw Moho file, I guess. This obviously doesn't have the full compositing. I'll just show you the effects. So these are actually just smoke and effects clouds that were taken into After Effects afterwards, just to composite and add different texturing and effects on top. And the Guardian rig, so he's again just entirely vectors, entirely 2D, really just sort of a cheat. So his body is actually just sort of, I think I just animated his body or sort of the tunnel, or just, I guess the main area just really all together, and then just sort of tracked his legs as he just crawls back through. So if I actually just take a lighter file, because he's quite heavy, a bit. But yeah, this guy was another, I turn back on my labels just in Moho settings. Oops. But yeah, so this guy was another just sort of a fun experiment, just something that was sort of chipping away at in the evenings. So he has a couple of simple smart actions, really nothing too complex. It's just really different sections of the body have different turns and tilts, really. I think that was maybe just the most time consuming part, really, just building those turns. So they're all just vector shapes, just sort of with animated layering, just appearing on top, different layers and parts. And there's also just the effects animation for the attack. So it's really just a couple of frames, but that's something that could be separated out for compositing to build that attack. So it's sort of a glow, sort of a power attack. And yeah, I guess the most complicated element was really just the legs. But again, these had a pretty similar structure to the Hades Bonhai, just so just these simple sort of claw-like smart actions. And again, I think these are actually pin bones. So there's somebody, that's one of the beauty things about Moho, is that there's so many different ways to approach different rigs, whether you just want a simple path or if you want to actually construct it with bones and different options, different types of bones. See, this guy is a bit heavier, I guess, just in terms of exporting and things. For comp, you would want all those different legs and elements separated, but really it's still like such a fast and efficient rig, I find. Particularly, he's not really too texture heavy. Oh, I had a crash. Oh, sorry there. Yeah, that is the one thing. Just with that guy, he can just be a bit heavy. Let me just load that back up. But yeah, so I guess that's just really just that kind of concept in general, really just sort of experimenting with these different rigs, these different characters, just playing around in Moho, exploring different ways to really explore the options. Yeah, so I think if I just open up the other files, so I'll show you these guys. Yeah, so yeah, just exploring at rigging, really just having fun and stuff. Yeah, so then I guess just in terms of animation and effects. So this is something that myself and Victor Paredes have been doing in Cartoon Saloon for quite a while across different productions, so across the different feature films and different smaller productions, really, is just sort of aiding the hand-drawn teams, really. So whether we can take crowd characters or different, I guess, different background elements or vehicles or any sort of textures or debris, any sort of effects, anything really just to help different characters integrate into the world and just really help speed up production, really, just so that the hand-drawn animators can just spend more time on their very complicated hand-drawn work. But yeah, like that's something that Moho really just excels at, and you'll see this particularly in productions like Wolfwalkers. Like it's almost like the directors even said themselves, it's almost impossible sometimes to distinguish between Moho characters and the hand-drawn characters. We just like blended them so well together, really. But yeah, that was just, I guess, just another area that I just wanted to explore or just kind of share some useful techniques on, really. So this is something that I love just sort of experimenting with in my spare time as well. So I guess just different useful techniques or effects within Moho that can just help. So one really simple effect, I'm sure everyone probably uses it, but I guess just particularly in terms of like hand-drawn effects and things, these are really useful. So even just simple strokes. So these are really just like animated line widths, basically, but I've seen like throughout different productions, massive effects teams spending a huge amount of time just on hand-drawn effects and different vector tools and things. But in Moho, like we can so quickly and efficiently sort of create these effects and just really easily to manipulate and change them to the characters. So this was actually, if I show you the GIF, so these effects were done in Moho, but then they were just composited in After Effects after and just sort of offset and just applied with textures and things after. But again, just really simple, fast, like vector, different options and effects to use within the program. So it's just a useful thing to explore for different effects, animation, and different ways to approach things, as always. So yeah, so if you can probably tell, I'm also like a massive Ghibli fan, so I'm always just looking at their work, and like the Ponyo especially is just like a masterpiece in water and effects animation. It's something that they just really just excel at. It's just really incredible. So yeah, there's just, again, bits and pieces of effects and things I just love sort of exploring within Moho. So these are just really simple. There's just simple ripple effects. Again, these are just the line tool or the stroke width tool, just with lines becoming thinner as they grow out. So another really simple but effective effects tool in Moho. And then I guess just because I'm sort of a compositor and animator and just massive nerd in general, I'm always just interested in exploring different ways to animate different effects, whether it's not quite hand-drawn, but not quite just like an compositing filter just sort of slapped on top, just really experimenting with different ways to sort of blend between that hand-drawn look and that sort of just sort of more digital effect. So these are actually noisy keys. So I go to Windows and keyframe. So there's so many different keyframe options in Moho. These are just like, they're super variable, so you can get different options. So the noisy keys, they actually add sort of a boil to the vector lines. So that combined with a mesh, you can actually just totally distort sort of shape. So that was just sort of the starting shape, but you can just key and mesh and create that sort of very distorted ripple effect, really. So if you did have, I guess, characters just standing in front of a lake or a river and we're trying to create some sort of like hand-drawn reflection effect, but you didn't want hand-drawn animators spending forever and hours trying to create this, you could very quickly and easily just distort it with something like a mesh. And it could even just be a PNG sequence of animation that you could distort with a mesh on top as well. So it's always just like super fun stuff to really explore, just different options and things with. And then I guess just for this waterlog, so if I just show the still. So again, yeah, the Ghibli animators, they're just masters. They had this sort of boiling line underneath, just sort of the underwater effects. So really, I just explored, I think, so these were just vector shapes. Oops, let me turn off the mask. So these are just simple vector shapes, and they're actually just bound to different bones, and these bones actually have bouncy keys. They should have bouncy keys. But yeah, so they're really just, I'm not sure if the frame rate, hopefully that's clear for those, but really it's just this different sort of underwater sort of ripple effect you can have sort of on those shapes. So they're just simple keys, but they just create that bouncy water. So yeah, the red points are just sort of bound to these different bones, so you can easily offset them and just treat them and animate them to create that different sort of bounce effect, really. So it's sort of just really a quick sort of approach to something like that, but it's something that you could also just composite again in software like After Effects and things, and just explore more of those different blend mode options and things. But yeah, these are just kind of little bits and pieces of tests, really, that I just enjoy sort of exploring outside of massive rigs and animation and such. Just again, as a compositor, just a massive nerd, I love this stuff. But yeah, so then I guess the Moomins. So if I go back to my panel here. Yeah, so the Moomins, these guys, so this was actually a fan-based, like sort of a Moomins reanimated project where we basically just took an entire episode of the Moomins TV series and a huge selection of artists. I think almost over 100. It was like a massive undertaking for the coordinator who was managing it. But we basically just took an entire episode and each artist had their own scene or shot. So actually, if I play the video for you. So again, this was something I was just exploring in Moho because I knew that the coordinator, they had so many different artists and people to manage and it would just take quite a bit of time and I didn't want to delay them really. So Moho was sort of perfect for just creating like these simple enough rigs, but that are still, they still blend quite well with that watercolory, gentle style really of the show. So it was just exploring those different options. So I'll play this through. I'm not sure if you'll have sound, but if not, this is also up on YouTube and my website and stuff. So it's there to see. Oops. Yeah, so that was the movements really. So the sound and effects and the voices and everything are also obviously from the TV series. But yeah, that was a really just sort of fun little experiment. So I'll just talk you through, I guess, just the rig and the scene for these guys, because these were fun. They were kind of a mix of, I guess, sort of textures and things within Moho. So sort of like some elements of compositing, but not quite. It was just sort of exploring different ways, again, like how to explore those like textures and different things, because usually like for tonals and things involved in characters, they're very labor intensive. So they usually need massive separate teams to add tonals and textures for those characters. It takes quite a while. There's a massive sort of compositing backhand process as well. But in Moho, actually, I realized that just with the sheer amount of brushes that we have, so there's a huge amount of texturing options. So if I just show you within the software. So I think this line was CK, yeah, CK low pressure. So there's actually two different options. So this is the brush that comes with the software. But yeah, it was great for just exploring this very simple sort of chalky sort of texture style, just to create a simple shadow on the rig. But what was great was that for some variety, so if I turn off the masking just on this guy's body, so there's actually a combination of two shadows. So there's the actual shadow on the body and then just sort of painting over, so sort of a lighter shadow as well. So sort of the combination of the two, you can just sort of blend that harsh edge. So this harsh edge up here. And so the great thing just about, I guess, brushes and things in Moho is because, again, because they're vector, you can rig these to bones. You can just animate these frame by frame if necessary. So if you did, again, have like a massive 2D production or any sort of like indie production that you had and you wanted to like create shadows and such for characters, you could easily do frame by frame, like really like soft, delicate textures for characters. There's so many options really, and it's something I'm still just exploring, really, texturing and things in characters. But yeah, so in general, these guys were pretty simple. The style really wasn't too complex, again, because I just wanted to get through them for the coordinator and the animator. So there was just a collection of simple hand shapes. And then I think I was really just relying on silhouettes and different shapes within the rig. Yeah, so there's a couple of just simple shapes, really. But yeah, the idea was just to keep these guys simple because they are really just sort of static in the rig. So they're just sort of sitting in the cloud. So if I actually show you the actual scene with the rig, so this will look a bit crazy just because of the brushes and textures, but if I'll just show you through. So Snork Maiden is actually just a duplicate of Moomin's rig. She just has some extra features. So she just has like just some bangs and little anklet and things as well, I think. But yes, like it was really just something I just knocked out like over a couple of evenings and weekends. I really didn't spend a crazy amount of time, just sort of under a month. But so the rigs were simple enough. They were just sort of straightforward bones, I guess. And the clouds were probably one of my favorite parts because these were just these simple little cloud shapes. So if I actually show you the textures first, it's just the shadows. So again, this is another really great feature just about the textured brushes and things in Moho. So you can probably see, based on the line width, there's different sort of styles. So you get this sort of pinched effect. You can just sort of scale as you go, really. So it worked great for this sort of design, or they're just these soft, gentle clouds, but they still have these sort of details, just these pinched effects in the inside. And again, those shadows, they move and they work with the rig. So it was a really nice feature. So if I try and solo just one cloud. Yeah, so these are really simple. Again, they're just bone animated. They just had some simple cycles. Just simple cycles, some sort of bone stretching. And really just all the clouds were just sort of combined together to create this sort of massive cloud that Moomin himself was just sort of sitting in. So you can see how they animate. So yeah, so something like this, like it would work so well, especially for like a TV animated series. It's just light and efficient really for animators to work with, which is always the goal at the end of the day. It's really, sometimes you can just overpower rigs or scenes with so many textures and things, but trying to just, I guess, just like find the lightest, most efficient option really for teams to work with, so that you don't have just a load of upset animators really trying to find lighter ways to work. Yeah, that was really just for those guys. Again, it was just another fun little experiment, really just experimenting with textures and brushes and trying to, again, just lighten the load really for things like compositing, whatever that would work into it. Yeah, so that is kind of a mix of animation and effects. And we have rigs. So yeah, so I guess just in terms of compositing. So again, I don't want to get too super technical into this or like start compositing an entire scene. That would be a bit sort of too much, but really if I just show you some useful features. So let's close these guys. So if we go back to our Guardian rig. Yeah, so these were a couple of, actually I'll just show the screen. So these were a couple of useful techniques that myself and Victor sort of discovered as we went on productions like Wolfwalker. So there were certain scenes and sequences where Victor was working on these tiny little crowds, but like super detailed, like so many characters and so many different elements. And the teams that were following like compositing and such, they really needed the character lines and colors and fills all sort of separated. So it was kind of a daunting task at the time. It just seemed like, oh, you'd have a scene with like so many different little characters and you'd have to go down through each rig and each character and separate all the elements. It just seemed like a lot, like it was just a huge undertaking really. But yeah, so these features, if I go to the project settings, so this was actually just sort of something Victor really just discovered. We, like, none of us in the studio really are aware of it in Moho. But the fill style and stroke style, so for an entire file, you can basically set just the display option. So this really handy window down here actually displays everything. So if I just render a frame, yeah, so you'll see if I just pull up a PNG. So it's a super useful feature, I guess, just in terms of compositing. So you can actually set like the fill to be white and any line. So like actually these like stroke details, these are entirely black, any of the ornamental designs on the Guardian rig. So it's super useful just for compositing teams after, just to provide them with things like Luma mats or separate mats to help separate different elements and things. So if you had a character with different ornamental details or jewelry or anything that needed to sparkle and shine sort of as they were moving, if it was part of their rig, you could very easily just like separate it with these elements if they were detailed strokes and parts of the rig. So yeah, it's one of those sort of nerdy things, I guess, just more of a compositing perspective, but it's just, yeah, it's super useful for different teams really to rely on. And yeah, you can easily set that back. So one thing just to be aware of, I guess, is that this does change the entire setting of your file. So if you do need to export separate files, it's always important just to save it as a separate option really. But again, it's just super useful really for us compositing nerds. Yeah, so that was one of the options. Another thing that's quite unknown, but this is very useful again for compositing and post-production teams, is just layer comps, I guess. So if any of you are familiar with Adobe Photoshop, I think that also has the same sort of a similar feature. So layer comps basically save sort of a visibility save state of your rig, if that makes sense, based on the layers in the rig. So I've created these different elements here. So if I just click expose visibility, so you can just separate the actual head layer of the rig. It's just an entire layer. So you can go through different just parts as well. So we have the legs. So again, if you had quite a few different renders or different parts of a rig that you wanted to separate for production or for a post-production team that we're following after, it's just a super useful feature because this can be combined with, say, render farms and different software like Deadline, and with different scripts and rigs. Really, you can just like sort of separate easily, just render and export those separate options. And it's, again, a very useful feature because if you do, say if you had a scene and if you did have to make quite a bit of fixes or changes to your animation in the scene or in the rig, and if you had to again requeue and update that file for the post-production team, it's very quick and easy. You can just easily update. So that would update your layer comp here, and you could easily requeue or just re-render your work, so it would update automatically for the post-production team. So it's something, it's sort of I guess it's just sort of buried away in the software. I haven't met too many animators or riggers who are really familiar with it, but again, it's just a super useful feature for post-production teams, especially on massive productions. But yeah, those are two just kind of the unsung heroes really in the software. Another very handy feature is just the Colorize. So this is actually in the layer setting. So if I just show you here, so this might be a bit similar to VFX. So if I just apply green color for the base, and then for the head, just apply a red maybe. Yeah, so this is actually just creating different mats really, that you can again managing a script or provide to different teams. If I just make this blue. I think there are quite a few scripts as well on the forms for this sort of feature as well. So again, this could just be like a custom script really, but if I render a frame, yeah, so again, you'll see that these are separated by different colors. So again, in post-production teams, they can very quickly and easily just create different colors and mats from these colors. They can just separate the RGB values, so red, green, and blue. And they can very easily use that for different parts and elements of the rig. So I guess having elements like this as separate layers, like built into your rig from the get-go before you even start on your production, is just a huge asset. Like it's something that just like can really assist and speed up post-production teams later on down the line really, because yeah, it's just a massive undertaking. For there are other options I think you could in terms of styles. So the styles are really just colors and effects applied to the rig. So this is another option potentially. So you could change just the entire body color really. You could just make that green. And again, this might be like a fast enough option if that was something for your production or your project really. If you're working on it, you can just quickly and easily change those colors. But yeah, it really just depends on your situation. There's also these glows. So this was actually something that I did for that. If I show you that GIF. Yeah, so it's quite small. Sorry, I think this is clear on my website, but yeah, so I really was just exploring. So you can see the post-production effects I applied to the green clouds that you saw. That was afterwards in After Effects. And really just this glow effect. So this pink. So that was entirely just a separate sort of color matte that I really just separated with a separate color like this. You can very quickly and easily just separate those effects. So it's also just lightening your load in terms of how many different parts and things you have to export. Again, it's just another super efficient way to work. But again, things like this, like they can be so easily scripted and built within the program as well. So there's just so many options and ways to explore these things really. It's just, yeah, it's super exciting, just super exciting, nerdy stuff really. But yeah, I think that is kind of, I did kind of blitz through everything there. I'm sorry if that was quite fast really, but yeah, I think that was kind of everything really. Just a quick sort of run through, just sort of a quick sort of general exploration really of those things, those rigs, those effects, just sort of bits and pieces. But yeah, I think that was kind of everything. I hope that wasn't too quick or too scrambled. But yeah, I hope that was clear. If we have time for the Q&A, I think that might be good. I can talk through more of the rigs and things. I don't want to ramble on too much for you guys. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Kim. This has been an amazing webinar. And we also want to thank everyone who's joining us today. For example, Hamed from Egypt, Caitlin from Rhode Island, Axi from Mexico, Oscar from Colombia, Lila in Sun Valley, California, Dubai, Ariane, Canada, Ashley, Lebanon, Amina, Jerry from Argentina, etc., etc. So thank you all who have been learning so much from Kim. And we can start with a few questions, general questions that we received. For example, what made you become an animator and what's your academic background?
Okay, so where did I study and stuff? So I had actually studied at IDT Dunleary. It's a college in Dublin in Ireland. So that was one of the colleges. There's Ballyfermot and there's IDT. But yeah, I studied there for about 4 years, I think. And then I just sort of worked briefly in Dublin for about a year at a small studio called Geronimo Productions. I'm not sure if they're still around, unfortunately. But yeah, I just sort of started off small and I just sort of just was in that small studio just playing around with different software and stuff. But again, I didn't really experience Moho until I actually came to Cartoon Saloon, because they're actually one of the few studios in all of Ireland, I think, are really just using it just for Puffin Rock. They have a fabulous team that they brought over with Jeremy Purcell and Mark Mullery and his team. So those guys have been working Moho for years, and they really just sort of like pioneered and pushed it into the studio across different productions, from Puffin Rock to Song of the Sea and different things. But yeah, I think that was just really it, just really the one college for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Kim, what are your inspiration references when you're animating?
Okay, so inspiration references. Yeah, as you can probably tell, I'm a bit of a, I guess, just a video game nerd. Like I just sort of love seeing like how the different studios, whether it's Nintendo or even a tiny studio like Supergiant Games, just I guess the different games and things that they're creating, the different techniques and things that they explore. Obviously, I'm a bit of a Ghibli nerd as well. I love Moomins, anime, manga, all that sort of stuff. I actually sort of grew up on the Moomins TV series in the 90s, so that was like sort of a passion project as well, just to get to work on this little fan animated production, really. But yeah, just like in general, just a huge Studio Ghibli fan, a lot of Japanese animation. I really love their sort of limited but like super effective approach to animation in general, I guess, across so many different productions, really. They're just like, yeah, just incredible, really.
And Kim, you mentioned that you learned Moho at Cartoon Saloon. Tell us about that learning curve. Do you find it difficult? Do you find it easy? How was that process for you?
Yeah, it was sort of a process that grew quite a bit. So actually on Puffin Rock on season 2, I was actually a junior compositor. So I was more sort of, I guess, getting to watch all the animation. So I was actually opening Moho files that the animators and the riggers had worked on with all the different characters and things. So I was really just getting to see their work, because I would then take exports and their scenes and bring them into software like After Effects. So I'd actually be able to watch sort of frame by frame how they had approached a certain scene, or I could see in the Moho file the bones and the rigs, like how they had animated things. It was such a simple sort of preschool show, but the quality and style of the animation was so just gorgeous. It was just a huge learning experience, really, just in that, even just as a junior compositor. So it's something that I would always encourage, like for any new students or any new artists, anything really that you can get if you're new to the industry, whether it's bits in scene prep or bits in compositing or any sort of like more technical, even if you can't get into animating or rigging yet, like any other productions or departments are always super useful just to gain experience, and you can work your way across. And yeah, I think following on from that, I was very, very lucky just on Breadwinner. I got to assist with some of the background Moho characters, some of the crowds in the real world sequence. So there were 2 sequences. There was the story world, which was entirely Moho animated. That was these little these little sort of cut out paper characters. And the real world had these different background characters and crowds, mostly just these men just sort of walking through the streets and things. But yeah, that was another huge learning experience, just practicing so many different walk cycles, different characters interacting, animals, just bits and pieces, really, just to help fill the world, really. And then across the different productions, really, it just kind of grew. So I think on Late Afternoon, I was just assisting Louise Bagnall and her team just with bits and pieces of Moho animation. I think there was things like bicycles and some things turning and sort of 3D, like sort of down a hill. It was still at the end of the day just vector shapes really, but again, it was just using Moho to really assist the animators in their work. And yeah, and then just across Wolfwalkers, My Father's Dragon, like they were just much more involved. So I was working with your own Victor Paredes. He was just fabulous. He was working on all these tiny little gorgeous like animated crowd characters, these little tiny characters, and we were just sort of building this big library and different scenes of like animated background elements, different carts, different sort of carts and animals and background characters and things really. And yeah, My Father's Dragon was just much more involved. There was much more like background elements and picture plants and the entire island and things moving, and so many different departments and characters were handled by Moho as well. So there's so many different crowd characters and different just a huge variety of stuff. So I really can't wait for everyone to be able to see the work of My Father's Dragon. That really is just sort of I guess just a massive culmination of just all the Moho team's work. Really, it's just, yeah, it's exciting to see it soon.
That's really awesome, Kim. Thank you for sharing your experience. And we can't wait to watch My Father's Dragon. We know that's going to be on Netflix. So we have to stay tuned for the date of the release, right?
Yeah, hopefully later this year, sometime later this year, hopefully. Yeah, I can't wait to see it.
Yep. So another question, this one is a bit more technical from Caitlin. She says, in the movie scene, how are the particles of the clouds done? The ones that are behind when they move, is it hand-drawn or something?
Okay, yeah, so this little sort of dust of clouds and things as they land. Yeah, I think, actually open the scene again. I think they were just tiny, just loads of tiny little clouds. There wasn't too much. I was sort of testing using a particle system with the same rig. So they are actually, again, just like reuse of this larger cloud shape. So if I actually click into them, but I think I had tried the particle system, but they got quite cumbersome because it was an entire rig. So they are actually just individual little groups of clouds. Yeah, so I think they were just sort of offset. So if I just scroll through those guys. Yeah, so they're just sort of appearing after Snork Maiden as she falls. And there's really just different groups, sort of just really different things in groups and threes. And this is actually, I guess, sort of a similar process to how we would do effects and things in compositing. So we would actually just take sort of the same piece of animation, the same shape, and we would just like duplicate it across different folders and groups. Really just similar. I think I just had this library of just a couple of clouds just sort of scaling as they went, and then I just sort of built up that group as I went. So they just sort of, just quite a few of them really, and they just sort of disappeared. I don't think I did too much in terms of compositing with them. I think they really just sort of, yeah, they did have a slight, so in After Effects there's like a slight roughen edges effect, like to apply sort of a texture to the edge. So they do sort of break up in sort of this little textured cloud really. But yeah, again, just like another simple sort of lighter approach really. But yeah, they weren't too complex, really just reusing the same cloud shapes that the characters had.
And by being also a compositing artist, do you think that helps you to visualize layers and structure of a scene when you're working at Mo?
Yes, definitely. So this is something that I've definitely found throughout rigging, especially. So there were some productions. There was Pete the Cat, a Cartoon Saloon, which was a massive Amazon project, really. But there were scenes in sort of a concert sequence in that series as well. So there were things where like we actually had shadows, just simple vector shapes and things, but they were actually added to the character rigs. So they were sort of, they would move with the characters, and we would be able to export that for comp and be able to like apply shadows and highlights and things after. So it's one of those things where whether you're just a compositor or a rigger or like an animator as well, it's a huge asset just to have experience in these different areas and just sort of across different productions really. I guess the Guardian might be the most complex example really, but again, that was just sort of, you could see how I just sort of separated those elements in the original file. So those green clouds, those green explosion effects really were just to create that sort of shape. And again, just being able to create those separate luma mats of just the glows from the rig, really, again, that was just a super, it speeds you up so much when it comes to compositing and doing those things after, just being able to have those separations and those exports. Yeah, that was kind of that.
And actually, now that you mentioned, that was another question. What kind of visual effects do you recommend doing directly in Moho?
Okay, so visual effects and compositing. Yeah, like there is like so much you can do within the software. I know that like I was saying about just the brushes and texturing, like I really think there's so much that can be done with these shadows and things. If you did have like a hand-drawn piece of animation, you could easily follow it up after with just these simple vector shapes of brushes and textures, really, and you can so easily hand animate that stuff frame by frame. Even in Moho, if it's just a simple one vector line, you can just sort of go frame by frame. But yeah, there are quite a few different, so if I even just click into the layer settings, so there are quite a few this was actually something again that we sort of explored across different productions. So we did have things like in Wolfwalkers, we had these textured lines or this forest line that we did sort of play around with. So there are things obviously like blur, you have a noise, you can sort of combine those two for some sort of different effects. If I try applying that to Snork Maiden's Cloud, see how that works. Yeah, so you actually, I don't know if that's clear, but you can get this sort of totally different noisy, hazy sort of effect. And the beauty of that kind of stuff is it's still sort of part of your rig. So it's really just being applied to the layer overall, but you can get just a different effect. So if I did want our cloud to have more of a hazy, sort of brushy sort of texture to it, that is definitely an option. Well, sometimes doing this kind of stuff in After Effects, it can drastically change the look of the final piece, but just being able to have that flexibility to add it within your rig, whether it's like for different colors or different design elements of the rig, it's just, yeah, a super useful element really. There are also some very handy features like if I go to a vector shape on the character, so in terms of noisy outlines, so this is a handy feature. I actually need to play around with it more, but you can create this sort of boiling line effect. Animated noise. Yeah, so I think you can see that in the preview. So again, this is super useful for something. If you did want that sort of, almost like in Wolfwalkers, that sort of oily, scritchy, scratchy, sketchy sort of line, this is a super useful tool really just to play around with. Extra sketchy. Yeah, so these sort of animate and they change frame by frame, although you can't really see it here with Moomin. Yeah, he just has crazy Groucho Marx eyebrows right now, but yeah. And again, it's a super useful feature. So if you did have a character with outlines, different shapes, you can totally try a feature like that and just play with the actual line and stuff. And again, these things are all part of the rig, so it's something that would be quite difficult to do in After Effects after, but you can totally do it within Moho, within your rig, and just play around with that style really. But yeah, that's another super useful feature. I really need to play around it more.
Thanks, Kim. Another question is about the stroke that you animated. If you can quickly show us how do you animate that stroke? Yeah, that one.
Yeah, for this little guy, for Tingle. Yeah, sure. It was just very simple sort of vector line. So if where is this file? Yeah, so these were just really just a simple stroke. So if I separate one, yeah, so Moho, it sort of displays the entire line, but you can sort of see it's basically just the line width, just keys and just this linear. So it is the sort of line that sort of appears quite thin and just sort of runs through the shape. And the idea is that it just sort of matches his silhouette, I guess, just all those shapes together, and that he sort of, like the effect is that he just sort of fades into, but you can really easily just with the stroke tool, just create those points. And you can change the curvature, you can change the design, these sort of shapes, and then just by using the actual stroke tool, so you can apply a line. So you would really just start with just make that slightly thicker, as you can see. Oh, I actually applied the texture, yeah. So really you would just start with just sort of a 0 width, and then you could have it gradually sort of come on at this line. And you would gradually just sort of create that shape as you sort of go. For those different frames, you would see it just sort of slowly move up along that line, and as it goes, you can just sort of remove those tools. But again, it's one of those effects where I've seen so many hand-drawn departments, they're doing everything frame by frame. It takes a lot of work, but with Moho, you really can just explore a very simple vector approach, and it's so quick and easy just to change your shape really as you go, just to try a more like graphic sort of style or different line texture. Again, as well, this is the beauty with textured brushes. You can have such a different style and effect really just with those lines. So yeah, it's a really simple but just super effective tool if you're doing anything hand-drawn or anything sort of like in terms of motion graphics or compositing really. Yep.
Awesome. And Kim, another question about the Hydra character. The body is not a bone but a path. That's an option to use a path instead of a bone. Did you draw the entire Hydra in Moho, or did you draw it in another software and then import it?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so the Hydra that was entirely Moho, he's really just vector shape. So if I just open him up again. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so he's basically just this combination of different vector shapes, and they're just really attached to that path. So it's so the head and everything really moves with that path. If I find it here. So if I actually just thicken that line, just make it a little clearer so you can see. So this path is really just a guide, so it doesn't actually render with the rig. It's entirely separate, but you can see how his head is sort of attached to this fixed point, and his body parts, or I guess his spine, they just sort of stretch to move to follow that path really. So it's a very useful feature. I'm not sure if many other softwares really have a similar sort of path approach, or like sort of like deforming, almost like deformers. But yeah, they're really just the so each spine is just sort of a piece of animation on its own. So I think if I delete all the movement on the path, so if he's just on the spot, yeah. So then if we try just posing him really, so you'll just see that they just run on their own really. So each spine just sort of had this very simple sort of vector rotation. They're really just simple vector shapes and just a shape order so that you can cheat. So these different parts, as they go, they just sort of disappear behind the layer, and then they sort of layer on top. So you get that sort of three-dimensional effect, but it's all just in one layer, just one animated layer, different vector shapes really just sort of combining together. So it's a really like, just to have all this happening on the one vector layer within the software, it's just super light and quick. It's so easy just to change anything. You don't have multiple layers or parts really to go through. And yeah, he was just really entirely just a path. I think the only bones actually were just used for his head, really just for the and a handful of the smart actions really, but the actual path itself was just entirely just one path really. The only different approach was just for the Guardian rig. So he was actually, this rig is a little bit older than the Hades Bone Hydra, so I was trying to just keep the Bone Hydra quite light. This guy was actually a very similar approach, but he did have pin bones, I think. Yes, you can see these red pin bones. So the path was actually just attached to those pin bones. So if I select, you'll see the actual point is just sort of connected to that bone. But yeah, it's another option, but I think just working with a path even is just sort of a lighter approach. As you saw earlier, this guy kind of crashed. So yeah, it's just trying to be careful with your rig sometimes. Like try not to throw the whole kitchen sink or too much into one part. Really just with the Hydra, I just sort of learned just to keep it as simple really, I guess, just as much as you can play with it so that he's light enough to play around with. But yeah, overall, like really, I just tried to keep him simple, really nothing too complex.
And another question, Kim, do you recommend to replicate or imitate an animation as a test, as an experiment?
Yeah, so I think like in general for, like I was saying, just for these kind of tests, I guess just to hone your skills and just to explore new techniques and new options, really, just being able to recreate a sort of like existing piece. Obviously, if you were going to use anything like this for your show reel or for any sort of like demo reel or piece of work, having, I guess, just a disclaimer in the corner just to make it clear, like obviously this is copyright Nintendo or this is copyright Supergiant Games and Studio Grackle and their work. But again, just as a piece of, I say like these GIFs, just being able to show, you can see just where I sort of demonstrate the bones and things after. Sorry, that GIF is quite small. But you can see after the animation plays, I just had a GIF with the, just showing the different smart actions and bones. So really it's just sort of a useful way just to demo your skills within a software like Moho, just to show, I guess, how you would approach building something like this, because that really is, I guess, the most interaction I get in generally, and like in terms of social media and stuff, people are always just like, whoa, like what is this software, like what are these bones and things, how did you like build this and stuff? And yeah, it's always just the most just beneficial, I guess, just to really just explore and hone your skills with different techniques, really. Yep.
And I guess time flew, but we have one last question. If you have any advices before rigging a character?
Before rigging, oof. Yeah, I guess there's so much to sort of play around with and such. I guess if I just jump back to the Hydra, so I guess like I had for this guy, so I would probably, I did have the trailer video as well that Studio Grackle had worked on, so I did have quite a bit of reference just for how, I guess, to approach these guys, how they should move, the sort of style. Obviously, there's this sort of Mike Mignolia sort of dark shadow style, all that sort of stuff that just gives you so much information and stuff to work with. How would you style this character, really? And then again, I guess just stuff, especially for riggers, this is just huge benefit, just having any model sheets really of characters. So like on any sort of production, even in Cartoon Saloon or any studio, really, you would always have just these very detailed sort of model sheets of just a turnaround of the character, different angles, different, what the mouth like might look like open, different mouth shapes, all that sort of stuff. So this sort of stuff in general is always just super useful to have just before you jump into a quite a large detailed rig. I guess just planning for that stuff, even if you want to even try just sketching different shapes, like how you might approach different parts of the rigs and things, really. So I think for the Hydra, because the guys had such detailed model sheets, it was pretty straightforward for creating those head turns and shapes. Like really, these head turns, they were pretty much just copied straight from the model sheet that the guys had. They already had created like this great sort of 3D sort of shape that I could easily work with and just sort of key in between. But yeah, I guess it's just having really as much reference as you can, really, just to start with before just sort of jumping in, because obviously it's so much work just rebuilding from scratch, really, but then as much reference as you can have, the better, really. And also, I guess, just any sort of anatomy studies and things, if you can study serpents or any sort of large snakes, any sort of anything similar to that sort of style, like that sort of coiled style that snakes and things make when they're attacking, it's always just cute, like amazing reference to have, really. Yep.
So with those wise words, thank you so much, Kim.
Okay, thank you, Mario. Thank you again, everyone, as well. Thank you for being patient when I had the crazy crash and stuff. But yeah, it was super exciting.
It was super excited and we learned a lot. So again, thank you, Kim. And we want to thank everyone who joined us today. Also, we would like to share one last bit of information. Learn more about Moho in our social media channels, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Visit our website and subscribe to our newsletter to receive latest news, discounts, information, webinar information, etc. And also to follow Kim on her socials. Follow her on Instagram as Koi Kim, Kim Koi Koi, Twitter, and her website kim/kelly.net. So once again, thank you, Kim.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again, Mario. Thanks so much for organizing this and everything.
And thank you all who joined us. So stay tuned for more webinars and information about Moho. See you next time. Bye-bye.